I'm wearing probably 3 different hats whilst giving this presentation, and it's worth just highlighting those because it structures how the Glendalough Heritage Forum has worked. So first of all, I'm speaking as a resident of Wicklow Town and someone who lives 20 minutes away from the wonderful landscape of Glendalough and spends a large part of my weekends going running across the hills and mountains surrounding Glendalough. And I got married in Glendalough, so it's a landscape that has a deep personal connection. I'm also speaking as head of the UCD School of Archaeology, who've had a research project involving particularly myself and my colleague Conor McDermott and many others in Glendalough for the last 10 years. And I'm speaking as chair of the Glendalough Heritage Forum, the organisation that I really want to speak about today. And at times it will be difficult to disentangle some of those aspects. Glendalough and the reasons we're working in Glendalough, I say on the title slide here that this is an iconic landscape. It's an iconic Irish natural and archaeological landscape, but it's one that's actually seen very, very little recent archaeological research and one that faces very, very significant management pressures and challenges, not least in terms of how to deal with visitor numbers in the area. Anyone who's visited Glendalough in the summer will know and understand the issues around car parking, to take just one example there. Myself, Conor and others have been working in Glendalough since 2009, and as we've done so, our relationship with the local community and other communities, not just local communities, has changed considerably, and it's really out of that that the Glendalough Heritage Forum has evolved. And there's a variety of theoretical discussions about what community archaeology is, how much community engagement there should be, how much community leadership there should be in community archaeology projects. And as the Glendalough Heritage Forum has evolved overall, we've probably ended up touching on all of these different definitions or these different possibilities. Some of what we do is community engagement, some of which is community involvement in the process of archaeology, and some of it is clearly community-led. And it's worth highlighting, and again, this is a discussion that's not come up so far today, but if we're talking about community archaeology, is a successful community archaeology project one that has good archaeological outcomes or good community outcomes? And I know colleagues in the UK who've been quite happy that their community archaeology project has been an abject failure in terms of archaeology, but has worked really well in terms of the local community. And hopefully that's the last time I'm going to refer to an abject failure in the rest of this talk. So the Glendalough Heritage Forum was founded in 2015, really on my initiative, and arising from the 6 years we've been working in the valley. And that period of time had allowed us to build up a network of different stakeholders, members of the local community, landowners and state agencies. And those relationships of ownership and management were incredibly complicated in Glendalough. We had excavation trenches. They're only 5 metres long, but they involved 2 different state agencies owning the land that we were working on. We'd had the opportunity to get to know lots of people, and without that background of trust that we had built, none of this would have been possible. Because unfortunately, and I'm going to speak explicitly about this, and it's a sensitive matter, so I'd appreciate people's discretion around it, unfortunately some of the relationships between members of the local community and the state agencies in Glendalough were quite problematic. And indeed, at times, members of the local community said that this still felt like an era of the landlords in terms of who was controlling the heritage, the landscape in which they lived. And a particular flashpoint in this regard had been the graveyard at Glendalough itself. The graveyard which is still actively used by members of the local community and in which their families are buried. And there was long-standing concern about the condition of the graveyard, which was a very romantic, ramshackle, overgrown, nice background to photographs, but for many members of the local community, this was not an appropriate and respectful way of managing the graveyard in which their family were buried. Matters came to the head around the time of the Obama's visit to Glendalough. Members of the local community cleared up parts of the graveyard more robustly than they should have done, and state agencies became involved against parts of the local community. So there was a considerable difficulty surrounding the graveyard itself. And the earliest meetings of the Glendalough Heritage Forum, which I chaired, were some of the most difficult meetings I've ever chaired in my life, and I've chaired too many meetings. A really serious lack of trust around what different people on other sides of the table were doing. And that was the thing we had to overcome, and I think we have managed to do that, but it has taken time overall. And hopefully I'll be able to persuade you that the interactions that have arisen through those stakeholders have now helped us fulfil the aims of the Glendalough Heritage Forum, which really we're trying to increase understanding of the cultural heritage of Glendalough and collaboration and engagement as we do so. So we're a very loose organisation. It's non-statutory, it has members of the local community, it has members of different state agencies and different researchers. If you want to see what we're doing, please have a look at Facebook. That's where we update most of our activities as we go through, and I'll come back to social media in just a short while. So Glendalough Heritage Forum, we run a range of different activities through the year, but particularly in Heritage Week, and in most recent years it's been that suite of activities that we put there. And in this presentation I'm just going to focus on work on the graveyard, our exhibitions and engagement events, and the excavations themselves. It's worth noting that in any given year we rely on obtaining public money. We normally get in the order of 10 or 15,000 a year. There is also substantial support in kind from UCD School of Archaeology, from National Parks and Wildlife Service, particularly like to acknowledge the support of Anne Fitzpatrick, and OPW. And the very, very active support of Wicklow County Council's Heritage Officer Deirdre Burns is critical here. I'm going to highlight some of the particular funding we've used in due course, but Deirdre's support as an active member of the forum is really very, very significant. Okay, so we start with the Community Graveyard Survey. We argued that the best way of rebuilding trust was to train members of the local community in best practice in graveyard recording. So we received grants from a variety of different sources, and you can see them there from 2015 onwards, to bring John Tierney in of Historic Graves and train members of the local community. And that's led to the execution of a very successful community graveyard survey, which I'll show you the results of in just a minute. That's often also included tours of the graveyard for Heritage Week, highlighting some of the most interesting of the gravestones, and we still continue to work on the idea that there should be a formal management plan for the graveyard as a whole. But the graveyard survey itself, using the techniques that John and Historic Graves use widely throughout the country, involves numbering and recording of all of the individual grave markers in the graveyard at Glendalough, entering those, transcribing all of the inscriptions using Oni mirrors and umbrellas to create shade, transcribing all of those onto recording sheets, and then transcribing all of those onto the Historic Graves website overall. I understand now that approximately half of all queries to the Historic Graves website relate to Glendalough. We have now recorded 2,000, the community group here, led by Sister Breda Ahern and Father Michael Rogers, have recorded 2,078 grave markers in the graveyard at Glendalough. By way of comparison, the average rural graveyard in Ireland contains 70 grave markers. Glendalough is somewhere slightly strange and slightly special overall. And as I say, they are all available to any of you online if you wish to try and find a relative who you feel may be buried in the Glendalough graveyard. And I'm delighted I've deliberately used a 2015 image here, which shows green dots are where we've recorded graveyards, but the red area was where we were unable to get in because of heavily overgrown vegetation. And delighted that that relationship of trust between the members of the local community and the state agencies has got to a point where in 2018 we were able to formally apply to clear that vegetation and do so with the appropriate permissions from all of the appropriate agencies, and that's allowed the completion of the survey in that area. The local community, supported by the Heritage Forum, have put together a trail of their favourite, I think it's 24 different grave markers there. So this is available and you can use this trail to follow around the graveyard as a whole with little stories about some of the particular graveyards. And with a Creative Ireland grant this year, we are just in the final stages of completing the local guide to Glendalough Graveyard, an ebook which is offering a slightly different version of that trail and further information about some of the markers, and John Tierney has played a fundamental role in that. So I think we've moved the graveyard aspect of things on. We've also run a series of exhibitions and other events, and some of these very much falling into the wholly community-led part of this. So the last 3 years have seen exhibitions curated by Joan Kavanagh and Pat Reid, Pat who sat over here, looking at different aspects of the visual record of Glendalough. So Glendalough in photographs, in paintings, and in maps. Very successful exhibitions hosted in the Broca Resource Centre, and many of the images also now available online, picking up coverage in the local press as well. And I would recommend you try and have a look at some of these images online. The collections of them actually include material of considerable archaeological importance in terms of what it's showing us about the evolution of the landscape at Glendalough. We run a series of different outreach events. This is Aoife Patterson, a member of Glendalough Heritage Forum, running a project called Art of the Market Cross during Heritage Week of this year. Aoife took a rubbing of the Market Cross at Glendalough and invited kids to come in and take little round rules or different features of the cross itself and paint and decorate those in different colours. At the same time, you can't quite see it in the photograph, but in a corner of the room, the Discovery programme were demonstrating 3D laser scanning of different objects as well. So you could move people from the very simple pen and paper techniques through to the latest 3D techniques. Myself and Connor visited local schools to tell them about our excavations, to take them artefacts, and also to take them replica materials in, which was a great success, and they wrote us a very nice letter following. In a conference where we're looking at the value of archaeology for society and in the economy, it's clear the children have a very precise idea of the value of archaeology. Sorry, it's not a great scan, but we are rich, proclaims the archaeologist as they identify ancient treasures, if only it were that straightforward. And we run a series of public lectures, often updates on the results of the excavations, but also bringing in other experts in the archaeology of the area to talk about different features of Glendalough's cultural heritage, all of them hosted in different venues in Glendalough, regularly receiving audiences of somewhere between 70 and 100 people. We also deal extensively with tours of our excavations. We excavate immediately adjacent to the main monastic complex at Glendalough, and everything we do is absolutely in the public eye. And we run a series of different approaches to dealing with that public, from casual engagements with groups of people over the fence, through to a series of tours open to the public during Heritage Week, as well as tours facilitated for particular groups and particular individuals. We have no way of assessing the total numbers of people that we've interacted with in this way, but in terms of the formal tours that we've offered and the Heritage Week tours, it's easily in excess of 400 or 500 people in each year that we've done this. So it's a major outreach initiative overall. You get a sense here, this is where Christine and I can play competitive feedback comments from various people who've been involved in projects. You get a sense here from these comments. There's a few that it's worth noting, and one, in terms of what we were talking about earlier, the third one down here, from the visitor whose key point of this was that they got to hold the archaeological object. Now, I'm very careful when I'm giving these tours. I don't give them the good stuff to hold. They only get to hold some of the lesser valuable material. But that simple point of contact was really, really important. I particularly like the quote about this is great work and top science, Irish science about Irish heritage, SFI fund this work. That's a very useful thing for someone to have said. But note the idea here that we have visitors from overseas and we're sharing this heritage. We work with the Balseskian Reception Centre for Refugees. We brought them on a tour this year, and the group leaders there were saying that this gave them an opportunity to learn something of the country in which they now live. And we also work with the Southside Travellers Action Group. I have never had to work so hard on a tour as I did with the group of travellers who asked question after question after question, and never the ones that I expected to actually have to answer. It was an actually fascinating process to do. And in terms of the conversation we were having last night about tour guides, simply by chance we happened to have a group of tour guides who were being taken on a general familiarisation tour at Glendalough and then engaged with what we were doing. So large numbers of people we're engaging with here. We then have the community excavations themselves. You get a sense from the photo on the right here of just how close we are to the main monastic complex at Glendalough. And this really has been driven as a project by Connor, by Matt, myself, but with many, many other colleagues involved at different times, and with main financial support coming from Wicklow County Council, Heritage Council, UCD, and lots of support in kind from National Parks and Wildlife Service and OPW. We run an excavation for 2 weeks in August as a community excavation, and then we stay on site for the following 2 weeks as our student training excavation. And in terms of the community side of that, we've had about 50 people in each of those years, contributing about 100 people days of labour. And in terms of these comments we've been making about communities, it's very notable how the dynamic changes when we move from the community excavation to the student excavation. And a very mixed, a very diverse group, perhaps still not as diverse as it might be during the community thing, with lots and lots of buzz and lots of conversation, to a situation with the students where suddenly it's staff and majority 19 and 20-year-old students. And the nature of the site changes quite a lot at that point. The community excavations are staffed in the same way as our training excavations. We have a high ratio of senior and experienced students on hand to help out with different things. So the community do work side by side with students from UCD as well. Just to highlight again exactly where we are and to come back to this point about the absence of research at Glendalough, we're located roughly where that yellow circle is, in between the main monastic complex and the beautiful Church of Our Ladies or St Mary's. No one had done geophysical survey in this field until we did it with our students in 2011, which is simply a staggering oversight in a landscape of this importance. And no surprise at all, this is absolutely full of wonderful archaeology. If I'll be excused a brief personal anecdote, my first ever training excavation, we were told we were excavating the ditch of a Roman fort in a housing estate on the outside of Coventry. Believe me, that's every bit as bad as it sounds. When we got to the bottom of the ditch, I identified a large stone on which someone had written in marker pen, "Hello, I am Percy the Roman." And because we were trainee archaeologists, they'd given us last year's backfill to remove. And we do not do that. We do this with real archaeology. There are real research questions driving all of this, and the results are of really high quality. So this is the main excavation trench we've been working in. On the right, as you look, you'll be able to see an area characterised by a whole series of large pits and beautiful pulsed holes with packing stones in them, many of which date to the 8th century AD, so perhaps indicating the earliest phases of the monastic complex at Glendalough. There is then a very large enclosure, potentially an early enclosure ditch. We're still not at the bottom of this, but remodelled extensively in the 12th and 13th century to provide channels for water mills that must have stood immediately adjacent to the main complex itself. Just to give you a sense of the layout there, this channel must have been coming in from the Glendalough River, covering many hundreds of metres to locate the mills in this area. And there are historical records of mills being destroyed by floods, which perhaps helps explain why they put them up on this high area rather than down by the rivers. It may also be that you're placing it immediately under the watchful eye of the main monastic complex. And we find really nice stuff. So we always say as archaeologists we don't like to find treasure, but we found some really good high quality Hiberno-Norse material culture. The excavations themselves we publicise widely, mainly online. It's worth noting here 57,000 people were contacted in our call for taking part in the excavation. I don't do Facebook or social media. I don't really know what this means, but apparently it's quite a large number, and it seems like a lot of people. We worked very extensively with media as well to promote the opportunities to take part, and therefore it's absolutely no surprise that we ended up filled to capacity and having to turn people away, which is very unfortunate. The communities we create are diverse. We need to get hold of more demographic information and socio-economic information, but they come unsurprisingly mainly from Wicklow and Dublin, but from throughout Ireland as well, and some from overseas. We had people coming in from Brazil for this year. They both happened to be in Ireland anyway for different reasons for the time, but joined us. If you want to hear the perspective of the community volunteers, the best place to go to is Neil Jackman's Amplify Archaeology podcast, an excellent podcast where he spoke to a number of our volunteers. So the first half of the podcast is myself and Connor droning on about the research background and all of those sorts of things. The second half is the volunteers telling you their stories of the excavation. You also get the same kind of idea from the feedback we get from people here. I'm not going to try and read through all of these. It highlights in part the returning aspect of community, the people who've come here year after year to be part of the project at Glendalough, those who just came for a very short period of time but ended up giving much more of their energy and time and really falling in love with the project and the team overall. The lengthy quote in the middle is just worth noting. The level of interaction with the excavation astounded me. I was allowed loose with a trowel on a project of this importance. We were made to feel enormously welcome. The knowledge bestowed on us was fantastic. So we think in general people are having positive experiences. We reach out to children as well, slightly complicated because many of us aren't Garda vetted, so we can only work with children if the adults are present as well, which means we're a little bit more restricted in time overall. For older kids, we run a day of teenage excavations. For younger kids, we work with Mark Kelly and the School of Irish Archaeology to provide them the chance to run on the Big Dig itself. Out of all of these things, and as the father of a 12-year-old and 14-year-old, the quote that most impresses me here is the slightly begrudging 12-year-old who said, "This was pretty decent, and I learned a load of things." One story for European Year of Cultural Heritage. This is Cormac McGrain. We saw his photograph in the keynote address last night. Cormac, a community volunteer who's come back for a couple of years now. Cormac working away on the sieves, and many of our community volunteers love the sieves, absolutely love the sieves. Cormac, while sieving a bucket full of black mud, found this small jet cross. It's 8 millimeters in maximum dimension with a tin inlay of a circle and dot motif. It's perforated on one of the arms and would have been worn as an amulet. It's a type which is very rare in Europe as a whole. There's about 25 in total. They're 12th to 13th century. They're made from Whitby jet in North Yorkshire. And my favourite bit of this is the distribution of them is Ireland, Britain, Norway and Greenland. So a North Atlantic European world, probably speaking to the Norse influences. Cormac told us in the first year he was here that he's well known by Wicklow County Council for grumbling at them about just about everything, but now he was actually going to have to come back to them with some positive feedback about something Wicklow County Council was funding, very much keeping with some of the things we're hearing about from Christina earlier. My final example is one of impact. I work in a university environment where we're asked to provide impact, and this is, I think, one of the best ones. A kid who came along for the day to do the Big Dig and look at the tours. And then in the next week he went to school and they happened to be doing a "what do you want to do when you grow up?" When I grow up, I want to be an archaeologist. And this is St Kevin's National School in Lara in Glendalough. And as his mum said, "You've inspired my 8-year-old son. He loved the Big Dig. Thanks, we've been back and seen it's all filled in, much to his dismay. So he'll be coming your way in another 10 years, having learnt how to spell archaeologist properly." It's fair enough, we all struggle with that one at different times. He may never grow up to be an archaeologist, but he may grow up with a love of archaeology and an understanding of why it's important. I hope to have given you, I've overrun by a couple of minutes, but I hope to have given you some sense of some of the things the Glendalough Heritage Forum has been doing, some of the communities we're creating by bringing people together to undertake different types of archaeological work. And I think really the forum provides a platform for people to do different things. It's certainly not the case that I sat down expecting all of these different forms of activities to take place, but we can support each other and build on the different resources we all bring to the table. And I very much look forward to the forum continuing in future years. Thank you very much for your attention.